Welcome to the Stewart Squared podcast, where me and my father investigate the past so that we can figure out where we are now in relation to the future. And we're going to talk about the third convergence. If you want to understand what the first and the second convergence are, go listen to the last one that we published. And we're going to talk about the third convergence, which is my dad is calling the reality disturbance field. Is that right? What did you call it?
So first of all, it's not, I give my partner credit for coming up with a term. Uh, so just as a small backgrounder, with another gentleman named Jim Ward, I'm starting a new venture fund called TK Media Tech Ventures. And our thesis is that we are facing and just entering now what we call the third convergence, and he calls reality disturbance. And this is what was in the last podcast, but it started back in 1979, and the first 30 years was the first convergence when digital technologies, namely personal computers and related technologies, started to change and converge with publishing and broadcasting. And that happened. You can look back and see, wow, that progressed from through 2010. And then the second convergence, which was predicted in 2010, actually a little bit after it really started, um, is the idea that the internet became a functional network that tied together all of the technologies into a single network. And that produced phenomena like the cloud, which is you could store your data externally in the cloud, as well as social media, right? You could connect to everybody else through the network, and related phenomena that really happened and produced enormous returns in the teens, 2010s, and is still going on now, right? So the social media revolution isn't over, although it's older now and we have some idea of what's going on. So our prediction is that starting in 2025, which is from our point of view 2 days away, uh, through 2045, we're going to have a third convergence. And the third convergence will be where when digital and real come together, you're going to have a hard time telling the difference between what is digital and what is real when you're confronted with it. And that might be behind glasses, it might be on your phone or your computer, or indeed in movie theaters or wherever else, so that it will create another wave of technology that's going to transform the media business. That was
Yeah.
pretty good.
Yeah. So it's so interesting because I'm not actively battling the technology because battling the technology is not a possible thing. It's going to happen. But I am trying to help people build an immune system to reality disturbance, because reality disturbance has always been a key feature of the universe, it seems like. So what I want to do is basically build in-person activities that relate people to each other. So where is the time point at which that becomes not possible because the tech is so ingrained with it's gonna split into species, right? It's gonna split into some people will adopt this new wave and some people won't. And then there will be a big spectrum of people who make all these decisions inside. We have the Amish on one side, and then we have the singularitarians on the other side in Silicon Valley. I would love to ask you what your relationship to singularity is. That would be fun to talk about. But we'll put a pin in that one and talk about the spectrum and all the people, all the decisions along. What do you think about that?
Well, if you take the second convergence and say that Netflix is the indicator, because streaming is a core part of the second convergence, the just the function that you can deliver video in real time over the internet at high quality.
Yeah, interesting. Real time.
So Netflix started with zero subscribers at the moment at which they introduced streaming, not the DVD part. And I don't remember exactly what that time was. We could look it up, and now they have 282 million subscribers. Um, and so, and that 282 million,
Whoa.
I don't think the Amish are watching Netflix.
It's a good question. Are the Amish watching Netflix?
They don't have televisions, so they can't.
Yeah,
Uh, do they have mobile phones? If that's the standard,
this is
then
a great
probably.
question. Okay, great. Are the Amish
So if you
what
apply the
technology
same,
does the yeah
yeah,
yeah
if you apply the same parameters, um, anybody that's now 282 million is still a fraction of the 8 billion human beings out there.
yeah.
So, and the internet is said to be used by about 3 billion, right? Give or take. Sort of half the humans have adopted the internet in one fashion or another. And so 10% of those people are subscribing to Netflix. Um, so, I mean, that gives you a scale just to understand how these things happen. And they don't happen overnight, even though it feels
Yeah,
like it
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
Um, so if we're 2025 is the marker for reality disturbance, the only people who really can experience reality disturbance have to put something on their head to do
Yeah,
it, i.e., Meta's Oculus um, headsets and some competition there, or Apple Vision Pro.
yeah.
And so putting something on your head is widely understood not to be something that 282 million people are going to do. Um,
Except for headphones. Headphones are the only thing.
Wow, audio only.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and yeah, people put on headphones or earbuds, right?
yeah,
Because now the earbud
yeah.
technology is good enough to compete with the headphone. The so I mean that's the scale. You have to like think about it in that regard. So we're the reason we chose 2045 is because that's the year that Ready Player One was placed in. Um, so that movie was made in 2018 and predicted in that case, almost 30 years later, that this is the way the world would be. And so you have to watch Ready Player One, but know that you can switch back and forth between real and digital, and it's very hard to tell the difference, and you can get confused about it. And our proposition is that the technology will get there. Um, and we think it'll be in the next 20 years, and that's a period of time when you invest in companies that will do that, that will enable that transformation, they can make a lot of money, which is my job. But the
Mm.
so that's what we're positing, and so knowing that that's going to happen, and if you disagree that it's going to happen, that's a separate conversation. But knowing that that's going to happen, it's actually not hard to spot which companies need to exist to make that happen.
Mm. So let's go into what technologies the Amish use. So they use power sources, batteries, solar panels, diesel generators. They avoid public utility lines, windmills. They also use gas or propane powered refrigerators and freezers, washing machines, gas grills and camping equipment, battery operated devices. Communications, they use telephones, are typically placed in separate structures or barns known as phone shanties. Some communities allow specialized black box phones as alternatives to cell phones. Certain business equipment like cash registers, copy machines, and typewriters. And then they also use agricultural stuff. So shop tools and motorized equipment, farm equipment and tractors, solar powered electric fences. It's so
So
interesting.
it's primarily mechanical.
Yeah, utilitarian to the max, basically.
Yeah,
No entertainment.
yeah, no digital, no entertainment. Because they don't dance and drink, right? That's I
Do
think
they dance or
that's
drink? That's a good question. I don't know.
that they do. But um, anyway, so that's the base. That's a good
Yeah,
baseline to hold because they'll be consistent regardless of what's
yeah,
going on in the world
yeah,
of
yeah.
technology.
They're an excellent control group for humanity, basically.
So then you have to say, what's the other end of the spectrum? And right
Yeah,
now the
yeah,
spectrum are video gamers who
yeah.
play video games in virtual reality.
And is that happening already? Are people, yeah, well, we talked about it, Second Life.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
So
would virtual, yeah,
my stepdaughter name is Blanche. I have an Oculus, what do they call it, Quest 2 sitting in the basement,
hmm.
which I hadn't used because, I don't really play video games, but I do buy gadgets to check them out. So she said, well, yeah, you got that Quest 2 sitting in the basement. Do you think I can have it? And I said, sure, it's all yours. I didn't even know how to wipe it. I know how to wipe an iPhone or a computer, but I didn't know how to wipe an Quest 2. So she she logged in as me and had to get a code. I gave her the code and she had it wiped in 2 minutes. And and I got a notification saying you've turned off your Quest 2. Sorry to see you go, but you can't get it back.
And then what did she use it for?
So she's taking it over.
Yeah, but what did she use it for? She played games?
Play video games, yeah.
Okay, interesting. So
A
people,
serious
yeah, there are games, and I've remembered this from at least 2017. One of my buddies, Eric Levin, who I've interviewed many times on Crazy Wisdom, and who I think you should talk to at some point because he thinks in this space and has worked at High Fidelity and all these other companies trying to do this for a really long time. And so he has always kept me clued into virtual reality, and then he introduced me to another friend of mine, Swan. And Swan was the woman who played Beat Saber on VR, and it was this video that went viral. And I played it, and Beat Saber was fun, and particularly because it's exercise based, which I love. And that leads us to Pokemon Go, because Pokemon Go also was this sort of substantial change in this reality disturbance. But again, Pokemon Go felt good. It felt like people were out and active and connecting with other people and other things like that. All of those things that I think are really important for this reality disturbance era that we're entering. Um, can you explain more about the initial part of Pokemon Go? How did it come from Ingress, from that original mapping game?
So we're talking about Niantic Labs,
Yeah.
um, which created a game called Pokemon Go. But before they did that, they started as a skunkworks at Google. Um, and while they were a skunkworks at Google, they developed two properties. One was called Ingress, which you referred to, which was a game, and I'll come back to that. And the other one's called Field Trip. And Field Trip was a piece of software that would allow you to walk around and find monuments and get the backstory on the monuments. And it wasn't really a game, uh, and it never went anywhere.
Mm,
Actually, not anywhere. Ingress got millions of users
yeah.
who loved playing the game, but there was no economics built into it. So that's still going on. Ingress is still a game. And Ingress was basically built around the idea that you'd have competing armies, red and blue, and you were a member of one of them, and you would join together with other people in real life to compete with the other army. And it was game dynamic, and it was very engaging, and it was actually location based. So, you had to be somewhere to use it, and then relate to everybody else in the game, both on your side and the other side, based on where you were and how many other people are around. Um, this is the core of reality disturbance. And the the expression of that everybody knows about is Pokemon Go, because they took a property that had been around for 30 years before they introduced Pokemon Go, Pokemon, which is a game that involves collecting characters, cards originally, and that's a very powerful dynamic for individuals. It's not necessarily a collective dynamic, but it is. I've got more Pokemon and I've got these special Pokemons, and it's a powerful motivation that people have. So they were taken completely by surprise by how popular Pokemon Go was, and this fundamental dynamic, which I described from my own experiences, being in New York City, having to go to the Apple Store to do something, coming out of the Apple Store and looking at Pokemon Go and realizing that there is a rare character in Central Park across the street, and seeing, while I'm standing in front of the Apple Store, seeing hundreds of people streaming into Central Park looking for that character. And so I went with them, and I followed the crowd, and it was like, mind blowing, because this game was sitting on your phone, was motivating these people to go to a specific spot in Central Park and try to find this character and get it before everybody else did. And uh, that's the first experience I ever had. And it was deeply, not disturbing, but deeply affecting that this game could make people in real time, in real life, go do the same thing at the same time. And so that's Pokemon Go. Now that was 6 years ago, something like that. And it's still the same thing, although all the people that were just doing it like me, because it was an amazing phenomenon, have fallen off. And now the core group is all the people that love Pokemon. And
Oh,
so it's
interesting.
strong. But the core thing was that you could look through your phone at reality. You
Yeah.
could see Central Park
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
through your camera, and overlaid would be the characters. And so that there was a overlay between real and virtual. And it's really the only game that's done that so far. They have a new game called Monster Hunters now, which does the same thing for a different um,
Property.
set of IP. And then they have one called Pikmin Bloom and a fourth one I can't remember. But so this is a known phenomena, but it's not considered actual augmented reality
Yeah.
because
It's
you have to
proto.
put your
Yeah, it's proto
put
augmented reality. Well, let's go back even further because this is an investigation of the history. What was the first time in your life where you saw the digital world and the real world collide?
Foursquare and Koala.
No, it had to be earlier than that, right? There's got to be
Mm,
other examples of yeah, I mean, I get philosophically you could say that the computer is the first one, but that's a hardware. That's a piece of hardware. So
Yeah, and you throw it, and all you're looking at is digital, not real. I don't know. Okay, so let's see.
maps.
Uh, lot, that's a little bit of a history lesson, but
Yeah.
first spreadsheet on a computer was called VisiCalc, and it was on an Apple II. And spreadsheets are a representation of real life, right? You're trying to model the numbers in real life. And but the first computer spreadsheet, VisiCalc, allowed you to change it instantly. And so a fellow that I've known for a long time, Jean-Louis Gasset, who used to work at Apple, called it the first business game, something like that. But he called it a game, right? Because you could sit
Yeah.
there and you could put the numbers in, and you could recalculate it, and it was like just like a game. It engaged you in modeling real life on a computer. So maybe that
Yeah,
qualifies for what you're.
interesting. Yeah, it does. It does because well, that's what a computer does, right? And going back to the Amish example, the computer makes that in a way that allows people to do something in the real world. The computer has always been a feature of doing something, unless you're playing video games, doing something in the real world. But even video games, people who play video games are affecting their chemistry by playing video games. So
Time
there.
Visica on the Apple II, there was the hot game was called Zork, and it was the interaction was entirely through typing. It was a role-playing game,
Role
and
playing game, yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting.
would type in, go left, go right, in order to move through the game and find the stuff you were looking for. Um, and out of all role-playing games, all role-playing games came out of Zork, right? But the graphics got added to it.
And that was in 79. And then in 80s, in the 80s, there was no internet, so there was no maps. How did you, please explain clearly, because I have an idea. I remember it, but for our listeners, particularly if they're younger than me, they won't remember this. How did people navigate the real world without Google Maps? And what was the progenitor to Google Maps? There was some maps thing before that.
I'm trying to remember. There were several maps before Google Maps, but that's a whole other story.
MapQuest. MapQuest.
MapQuest, but there was others too.
Yeah.
Uh, One that was owned by Nokia, or it might be that Nokia bought MapQuest. Um, the so absent computers in your pocket. No, absent computers at all, because with computers with MapQuest before it was on a mobile phone, you could map how you get from one place to another, but you had to know that you were going to do that in advance.
Yeah.
Um, but before that, there was a book, Thomas Thomas Maps, something like that. And for every city, they had a book, and
Yeah.
they'd have an overall map of the city, but then they'd have the detailed maps, and the maps were up and down and to the right and left would be connected to each other. So you'd go, oh, here I am here. So I have to go to the next map, and the next map might be on page 88. And I go to page 88, and then you'd see the continuation. You have to go to page 120, whatever it is. So you'd have to figure out, and you bring the map book with you, right, while you're driving, and you would map your way from one place to another. And I drove a taxi cab when I was in college for all of 3 weeks uh, in 19, hold on a minute, 1970,
Hmm.
72 or 73 is when I drove a cab in LA, which is gigantic. And so the Los Angeles area, Thomas Brothers map, I think it's Thomas Brothers, map book was incredibly thick. And I had it on my front seat with me. And people would tell me where they want to go, and they'd tell me how to get there, or I had to figure it out myself. So I got the map book out.
And were they
Completely different experience. It's so hard to imagine now that you would have to figure that out on your own with a printed aid.
and which is what I want to do for my treasure hunt that I'm organizing. I want to teach people how to do that. Mostly just as a fun thing. I don't take it very seriously in the sense that anybody will need to do that in the future unless there is global or regional unrest, in which case it's a helpful skill. But I just so often think about how many skills human beings have lost along the way from like the 1700s, from all like if we talk about publishing in terms of publishing newspapers or columns and everything like that, you had so many skills that you probably don't remember related to physically publishing, and you were a benefactor of the personal computer, and you had never done it before, and then all of the people who came before you had to learn all these technical skills. And it's going to be so interesting to go into the future and go into this reality disturbance where we won't need to do that at some level. Like some of it's going to go away, a lot of it's going to go away, and it will just be a kind of a conversation with a disembodied voice, I think. What do you think? Where does
Won't even
that fit
be
in?
that. Won't even have to have the conversation. So my test going forward is, what are the things we have to do still to get through our daily lives? And I know I've said this to you before, but it
Yeah.
comes down to time zones and calendars. Um, so, I mean, before we had calendars on computers, you had to keep track
Mm,
of
mm.
what commitments you made to show up somewhere at some time. And that was very hard for most people.
Yeah.
The sort of slice of people that are really good at it and anal about it and
Whoa.
are late or never miss an appointment.
What type of jobs would those guys do in the 1980s and the 1990s who are really anal about it?
Salespeople
Salespeople.
can't make an appointment with a customer and then not show up and not be ready or prepared. So you have to be anal about it. And disorganized salespeople are not good salespeople. Um,
That is
so you
interesting.
figured out how to do it. You did it on paper, and you'd have a little calendar, however you did it. So now, in theory, the computer calendars haven't actually made it any easier.
Yeah. It's
It
just a
made it
highly,
harder in some ways because, by definition, let's see, I'm in the mountain time zone in the US, and we change an hour. One thing Trump has said is he's going to get rid of that, but that will happen later. But right now, I have to deal with whether it's daylight savings or standard. And um, and then you're in Argentina, and I don't think Argentina
no, it doesn't do
switches
it.
time zones.
Yeah.
But you're in a single time zone that's 4 hours later part of the year, and 3 hours later the other part of the year. And you go like, what's better than a computer to be able to figure that goddamn thing out? But they don't do it, right? So why don't they do it? Well, it's a small problem. Big computer companies don't like small problems. Doesn't get them millions of
Yeah.
users.
Yeah.
Um, and their programmers don't want to work on stupid things. And you know, I can't explain it otherwise because we have all the resources at our disposal to solve that problem, except the computer companies haven't done it.
Calendly
Google
kind of done it. Google Calendar and Calendly kind
Calendar
of do it.
Calendar has done something that Apple Calendar hasn't, and whatever else. Google Calendar allows you to set a different time zone at the
Yeah.
beginning and the
Yeah.
end,
Yeah.
right? So when you take a
Oh,
flight
that's
from
why you don't
one,
use it is because you use Apple Calendar.
well, I use Apple Calendar, so I have to go into into Google Calendar and change the time zones when I'm on it, flying from one to another. Um, and then it was reflected in the Apple Calendar, but Apple doesn't give you the way to do that, right? Uh, so it's like, okay, Apple, goddamn, almost $4 trillion company can't be bothered with managing time zones for you. Wow. And they're talking about Apple Intelligence. And yeah,
So, so I have a huge problem with this that I've been learning about. So, I open up the phone. Hopefully, I don't do anything here that is
don't give away your code.
yeah. So we have so much going on up here in the upper thing. I can do this. Okay, I didn't want to do that. I was actually wanting to do a different thing. So I wanted to do that. So that's on the right side. Now I learned that I can tap on that. Oh,
If
only on Spotify.
you're in the calendar and you're going to move forward in the calendar, you can tap the top to get back to today.
Oh, yeah. So this whole thing, and then there's another feature that I sometimes can get. That's it. So yeah, it's like so
Yeah.
complicated, and I don't think Steve Jobs would have allowed that to happen. All that came after Steve Jobs, right?
This is feature creep.
Yeah.
This
Okay.
is
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
iOS is going through feature creep,
Yep.
which Jobs resisted, and it was a core part of
Yeah.
his value,
Hmm.
right? Because it makes it harder and harder to keep track of the features. Um, and so he would go through periodically. I'm pretty sure he'd do this. Go through and just kind of wipe out a lot of or embed a lot of features and make them disappear, right? So which is part of the culture at Apple. And one of the things that happens is they'll introduce a new version of the operating system with a bunch of features that they talk about, but there's other stuff in there they don't talk about that you find out about later. And it's like you're sitting there going, wow, I got this like a year ago, and now I'm discovering these new features. It's like a continual exposure of new functionality, which is magical. That makes you feel that's part of the
Mm.
magic of Apple.
Mm.
Google is far too rational trying to figure this out. But
Hmm.
so anyway, we're a little bit off, but
Well, I have a
my
question that comes that will tie that back, which is as we move into reality disturbance, it feels like simplicity is really important. And Apple is doing feature creep, Google is doing feature creep. All these guys are building these monoliths that are just getting way out of control. And as you mentioned with the calendar, it feels like it's harder to do calendars now than before. And there's a lot of examples of that. So, what's your take on that? What's your take on simplicity within reality disturbance? Do you think that that's necessary?
no, because not initially. When new things are introduced, they're introduced with a fraction of the features
Yeah,
that they will eventually develop.
yeah, yeah.
So there is a, and that some people call this crossing the chasm or something like that, or the uncanny valley, where you go from not knowing something is possible to going, wow, look, that is possible. So, and then at the point that somebody does that, and Google search is a perfect example of this because um, they just put up this page and it said Google and had a little
Yeah,
bar in it
yeah,
you could type.
yeah.
There was nothing
Interesting.
else, right? Which they've been pretty disciplined about keeping that. Um, but it doesn't matter anymore now that AI is in. You have a separate app now that either you talk to or make it search or whatever. So um, there's a point at which you get this blinding, magical experience of going, "Wow, didn't know I could do that." Like the first spreadsheet. You compare it to Excel now, and it's like it's like you know Excel is this huge
Mm,
beast.
yeah.
And, it's no longer simple even to open. It takes forever to open because it's such a huge program. Um, so, so what is it in reality disturbance that's going to give you that like mind blowing,
Yeah,
wow, I didn't
yeah, yeah, yeah,
do
yeah.
that.
Interesting.
Uh,
A
and I,
lot of
and I,
things. It feels like a lot of things are going to happen.
they will each individual, but then they accumulate into overall experience like the internet. When we started with the internet, when I first got it in late 1994, might have been 95. At first got the Mosaic browser and the IP, all that kind of stuff on my computer and opened it up and went, goodness me. But what I was looking at that time was a fraction of what it is now.
Mhm.
Now I can look at Netflix. And all of the data is coming over the internet. And so sometimes you're looking at an app or you're looking at a web page. It's this panoply of stuff that you can do on the internet, which did not exist at the time the internet started. So it took 30 years plus to go from that initial experience to the internet is everything. And, software eats the world.
Where does the
Um,
internet fit into reality disturbance?
well, it is the infrastructure,
Yeah.
right? For distribution. It's the endpoint experience. So anything that can be done to disturb reality can happen on the internet. The
It already
questions
does.
have, what's the delivery mechanism and what's it look like and what's the experience like? Are you going to have reality disturbance in movie theaters? Or is it only going to be on your phone, or is it going to be in AR glasses? And you know, um, I'm focused on AR glasses, and Jim thinks that's too narrow. Um, that because the idea that you can have a pair of glasses, shoot, I have one here, won't be live because
Too narrow.
battery is out. But you know, so I put this pair of glasses on. And they look kind of funky, and they're dark glasses because that's what I
I
actually
like
can
them.
take. So I'm looking at this, and unbeknownst to you, I'm looking at a digital overlay, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that is most specific, right? I could play Pokemon Go
Yeah.
uh, with the user interface they have,
Yeah.
uh, and you don't know that I'm doing that, but I'm still talking to you, and I can see you, right? This
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
this is
Why
the
does he think
paradigm.
that's too narrow? Oh, just in general, because there's going to be so many different forms. Like if you're in the movie
You
theater.
can do it on your computer, you can do it on headsets, you can do it on glasses, and at some level, it's just kind of. So one of the companies we're looking at, and I might have mentioned it before, is called Kubrick. Uh, Kubrick uses generative AI to generate hyper realistic backgrounds while you're filming in real time. So you can command it to make any kind of
Whoa.
background landscape while you're filming a movie. And this is transformational because it's like a fraction of the cost the way it is done right now.
While you're
We know
filming the movie, I don't understand. While I, as the user, am filming something with my like on this Zoom call in the background, changing the background,
if you're a filmmaker, if you're
or
making a film.
okay, got it. All right.
So it's a tool for producing, professional films. I mean, obviously that could cover a lot of
Hmm.
ground, but I'm talking about a movie. There's an X amount of cost involved in what used to be green screen, but now are like LED screens that create the background, and this is all done in software. So you can visualize the background while you're filming, and it reduces the cost of producing backgrounds and improves the quality. It's
Hmm.
really not backgrounds anymore. It's like the environment that you're operating in.
Which is funny, going back to our conversation on psychedelics, is because that's what psychedelics do to our vision, our visual sphere, is that we have this pattern that our brains have essentially co-hallucinated with all the other people in our species. And when you take a psychedelic, it disrupts the information. Like it's wildly varied because there's a 5-HTP2A, which is the particular dopamine or serotonin receptor that DMT interacts with, and something about that particular one gives you a lot of visuals. But there are other visual effects. But essentially, what I'm trying to say is that it disrupts the normal way that you envision reality, and then it recoheres at another point. There's a great book called Psychedelic Information Theory by James Kent, which I highly recommend. Which actually that should be your reality disturbance guidebook, I would say, because all of the things that you have mentioned have already been available to human beings to disturb their own reality. And many people, as is common in the discourse on Twitter right now, many people have a lot of varied thoughts on psychedelics. And as is usual with the discourse, completely misses the main points and is enwrapped in bullshit, which is pretty funny to make fun of, but otherwise not that helpful. I forgot where I was going with this. Any thoughts on
And
your end?
I wasn't paying attention because I couldn't track it.
Reality
Speaking of
disturbance, psychedelics. Psychedelics already
impact on
disturb our
reality,
reality.
yeah. So the And yeah, the joke that Jim makes while we're pitching this is like, we're still human beings. We still eat, breathe, die. Um, that doesn't go away, and we still need to deal with
Yeah, I
all
love
of this
it.
technology as
Yeah,
human beings. And he makes a joke about how, well, maybe sometime in the future, genetics becomes advanced enough that we become truly digital beings and we exist entirely in the digital world. But until then, we're disturbing reality. Um, so, so you have to look at the intersection, the touch point between reality and digital, right? So, digital is on this progression curve that allows us to at least put a headset on and be inserted into a
yeah,
digital world and to live in that world for however long we want to or willing to. And there are people that essentially spend hours a day with their
yeah,
Meta
yeah. Or just
Quest
people
heads.
on Twitter.
Um, so, but that's a very small subset
Yeah,
of humanity at this point.
interesting.
So you just try to expand that. And that's why I focus on glasses because we already wear glasses. At least some of us do. I used to. Um, and my test is when is it worth wearing glasses if you don't need them? Um,
Mm. Mm.
so if Pokemon Go is so far the first AR experience, when can you put that experience on a pair of glasses and get real value? Now it's interesting. I just put on these are called the Even or Evan. I can't tell how to pronounce it because it's a German company. These are Evan Realities G1 glasses, and they don't try to produce a digital environment on the glass. Um, Instead, they have dual LED screens that are embedded in each lens. Um, and what they can do is give you text information. So they didn't try to go
Oh,
overboard.
great. That's great.
Right. So you can sit here and you can walk around and they can tell you turn right, turn left. They can do that real turn by turn directions in real time. It has an internet connection. You can ask questions. You can look at something and say, "What's this?" No, I'm not sure they have
Wow.
that feature. Uh, so, there's a whole set of features that get enabled as the technology progresses, as it gets smaller and smaller. Right now, these glasses have these big bulbs at the end, uh, and pretty thick. The frames themselves aren't that thick, but so they've been able to embed all the technologies in the thick parts here. But, you know, they employed one of the co-founders as a designer, and so they actually designed glasses that look good, right? That at least in theory. And so you can see in that, right, this company probably won't be successful because they've got all the arrows in their back along the way, although they've tried to optimize for at least one use case. And but you can see how, if you've been around for a while, you can see how
Yeah.
people. I mean, another company comes along, and the big companies will watch the little companies. The big companies will do stuff like Meta did with the Orion smart glasses, or Snap's doing with the spectacles, um, or Apple's doing with the Vision Pro. And you can go, oh, wow, if you put every possible technology, you get the Apple Vision Pro, and it weighs 2.5 pounds, and it costs $3,500. And so you have a range, and you can guess what's going to happen in between and what the timeline for that is. And that's all we're doing with reality disturbances.
So I have to ask this question before we end this one. And so the last 10 to 15 minutes, when did you first hear about the singularity? Who taught you about it? What did you learn? Did you buy it? Did you reject it? Tell me your history of the singularity as a
Uh,
term.
the singularity, I heard about the singularity because there's a thing called the Singularity University or school or whatever it is. It's in
San Jose.
Sunnyvale.
Yeah. Oh no, you're right. Yeah, it's in probably San Jose or something like that. Yeah.
It's in it's a physical camp.
Southern. Yep.
Uh, and I thought, well, that's interesting. And that led me to go, well, what is singularity? When I first heard about it, I thought it was kind of a crackpot thing that, those weird people did when they're
Yeah.
thinking of long-term future.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm still not sure I buy it.
Yeah.
Um, it's more popular. There's more people familiar with it, but I still don't think it's mainstream.
Because I mean, what you're talking about is a core aspect of their philosophy. I should go do a much more thorough understanding of the Singularity University and progenitor of it. There was a great rant by Amsad Masjad, who is the CEO of Replit, who identified the first people, and it's somehow mixed with Yudkowsky, Eliezer Yudkowsky, who is the famous doomer in terms of LLMs and lives in a complete fantasy land, as far as I can tell. But don't we all? I guess I should be more humble about that. So in the late 90s, there's something happened with the singularity where the philosophers, there's a whole bunch of philosophical progenitors. I mean, Nick Land is also part of this group, I would imagine. Actually, that's a good question. I'm going to go, what is the relationship? Have you heard of Nick Land?
I've heard the name, but I don't know anything
Yeah,
about it.
yeah. Nick Land.
Uh,
Yeah.
the thing, just to overlay while you're doing that, the thing that happened with the singularity is the rich people bought into it.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
the university got
Interesting.
funded, money came in, and it became a legitimate thing to work on. So, plus at the same time, our university system appears to be collapsing,
It does.
right? The function of universities is to become
Oh,
apolitical domains for pursuit of research and intellect. And they've become politicized. The funding of them is all screwed up. And so there have been several instances of people trying to reinvent um, advanced education, and the Singularity University is one of them.
and
There's
it was
others
successful. It was successful.
so far.
Mm. I guess if Ray Kurzweil's predictions don't work out, then I guess it could become less successful. Actually, this is a great talk. There's more I want to ask about singularity. Maybe we can talk about that next time. But prediction. So you make predictions, and you then make bets on those predictions, and other people do that a lot. But there's also this phenomena in society where nobody pays attention to what people said in previously. Have you, or do you agree that this is real, particularly in the realm of politics, philosophy, all the predicting the future in terms of trends and such? Do you agree that or disagree that people don't really pay attention to what people said in the past, and they evaluate what people say in the present on all sorts of these irrelevant factors?
So you sent me a speech that JFK gave in 1961, which demonstrated that he was extremely well educated and
Yeah.
articulate,
Yeah, beautiful.
right? He could provide perspective based on history, and he employed a lot of history in that speech um, about the way things have been done in the past and the way things they needed to be done in the future, all based on the idea of the Cold War, which really hadn't been acknowledged in 1961. It was not a
Oh,
term.
interesting.
During Eisenhower, they didn't talk about the Cold War until JFK named it that. I may be
Yeah.
misspeaking.
There's
There's
but it was a slow burn in terms of the Cold War.
was a dawning realization that we were actually in a war with Russia without any battles, and which is what he was talking about. And that's why he had that speech. He's going like, in a world where we're having a Cold War, you guys, who publishers and editors, have to acknowledge that and decide where the dividing line is between what the public needs to know and what the nation needs to protect. Secrecy. And that's for me why that was so interesting. I mean, I was 9 at the time, not like I was engaged in geopolitical thinking.
Yeah, but
And but he was, and he was well educated, and he was part of the elite, and that's what he understood. Um, there's a whole nother session that we could go through on how we've gone from the elite running things pretty effectively
yeah,
to now
yeah,
everybody's running everything, and we
yeah,
get Trump
yeah,
result,
yeah.
um, or whatever, Millet. Uh, anyway, so uh, how'd you get me going on?
Cold War acknowledged JFK's speech. There's this prediction. There's this idea of predictions. What predictions did
Oh,
JFK make? Yeah.
here's the core of me. Um, if everybody agrees that something's going to happen, it's wrong. It's something I've been saying to myself for 30 years,
Yeah.
and it's a pattern, right? Um, Now, a fellow named Jim Breyer, who was the first guy to invest in Excel, and Excel made billions of dollars off their investment in Facebook. And Jim himself made more than $1 billion as his from his partnership share. So he's a very successful guy, and he has left Excel and has so much money. He's established his own. Well, I'm on his Christmas list.
Uh,
So I got a book from him this year called Pattern Breakers, written by a guy named Mike Maples Jr.
oh,
And I actually know Senior because
yeah.
he was at, and um, with help from a guy named Peter Ziebelman, who's a professor at Stanford. And the whole thesis is that no one could predict the things that will massively change society. It's
Mm,
a conundrum for a venture investor, which Mike is,
mm,
and because, and I know this, I've thought about it a lot. If you know why you should invest, you shouldn't invest,
mm.
because the thing you should invest in is the thing where you can't justify the investment, where it's some crazy ass thought.
Yeah.
And and he gives specific examples. But you never, I actually got bored and didn't read the rest of the book, but I read the first couple of chapters, and and it's like inherently, if the pattern you have to forecast is one that's not a pattern, you
Yeah.
can't
Yeah. Yeah.
forecast it, right? So you have to look sideways. You have to look outside of the realm of rationality to be able to see what might happen. So even our thesis at TK that reality will be disturbed is a rational assessment of what's going to happen going forward.
Yeah.
And if we're right, we will find a couple of companies that be worth billions of dollars and we'll make a lot of money as long as our process for finding those companies doesn't depend on predicting the outcome before you have any signal. So the underlying thesis for TK, from my point of view, is we only want to invest when we know the signal is on, right? So we may invest in a company that's worth more money, but we want to invest in the delta between having the first signal and the outcome. So that's the biggest spread. And so we don't, this is part of coming out of all supplementary partners. I don't want to bet on my ability to forecast that this is going to be an important thing. I want to bet on my ability to find the inflection point and invest in that.
Mm, that's really interesting. Oh man, there was a thought I had. I just lost it. Well, no, no. It feels like I heard that there's a paradox of venture investing, which is the sense that you're trying to predict the future, but you're not able to predict the future. And so you have a higher level thing, but then the higher level thing is disconnected from the lower levels. And essentially, you just described exactly what is post-rationalism, which is a philosophy that says basically the rationalists from 1850 to 1997 maybe they all thought of themselves as rational. But if you think of yourself as rational, you're in a bit of a trap because humans are generally not too rational. And all of the processes that we deal with are also not very rational, mostly due, in my opinion, to complexity. So that there's too much complexity out there. And in order to model that complexity, yeah, we can help, other people can help us. And there's all these different tools and tricks. But in the end, we're just kind of monkeys without any facial hair, or no, sorry, monkeys without a lot of hair. And so yeah, it's a wild world. And if you have anything else you want to say, feel free to. Otherwise, we can see everybody next week.
Uh, let's throw Elon Musk in there at the last minute.
Okay, let's do it.
I've told you the story that I had the opportunity to invest in a
X.
company, X.com,
Yeah,
that he started in whatever
95,
it was,
yeah.
98, I think it was 97, 98, somewhere in there, that ended up being PayPal and making a lot of money. And I walked away from that deal. Instead of investing in Elon Musk, I invested in the idea. And he's
Oh,
famous for starting in one place and ending up in another, and the other place is much more interesting. So X.com became PayPal and made a lot of money. Then he used that money to start SpaceX, and which was insane at the time to make
yeah.
rockets. And he was actually talking about Mars at the time. And then he took over Tesla, and made electric cars. It's like my opportunity would have been to find a way to interact with Elon Musk and then stick to him. Now, Steve Jurvetson at DFJ did that, the J and DFJ. He invested in Tesla. I can't remember which came first, but he also invested in SpaceX. And he basically has invested in everything that uh, Elon Musk has done. And so, well, okay, so Steve Jurvetson has made way more money than I have purely off of Elon Musk. And I thought I
Made the
walk
right.
away from the deal that I had the opportunity to invest in. So it's like, this is dirty laundry from my point of view. Like I was dumb enough to think
Yeah.
that I knew better what was going to happen than Elon Musk, rather than understanding Elon was the reason.
Man, it's fun.
Um, and that's happened repeatedly, right? So in Pattern Breakers, the book I mentioned that Mike Maples did, Mike says that he was an investor in Twitch, and I don't remember that, but I'll put that aside. When we invested in Twitch, it was Justin TV, and it was a crazy ass thing. Um, and we could not have predicted either what we thought would happen, that we'd make money, or what actually did happen. There were two different things. And although we now say that we understood the value of live streaming and blah blah blah, the the the
Yeah, yeah,
twist
yeah.
that turned into Twitch and became the thing that Amazon was willing to pay $1 billion for was totally orthogonal to what we invested in originally. And it's part of what Mike's describing in this book, Pattern Breakers, is like you couldn't tell that Twitch, that Justin TV would end up being Twitch, and it would be all about watching people play video games. It's like it's
Yeah.
had nothing to do with
Yep.
the original position. So,
Which is also history. That also explains history. Like very few people can accurately predict what will happen in history.
but you look at people who have
Yeah.
Jurvetson and
Yeah.
Elon Musk, John Doerr and company
Hmm.
after Arthur Rock, all these people, they understood at some level,
Mm,
conscious or not,
yeah.
that they need to invest in the people who would make stuff happen. And so
Yeah.
uh,
Interesting.
I have
Yep.
to say, and this is my dirty laundry, I'm not a very good investor because I keep investing in what I think rather than what the other guy's doing.
Mm, that is interesting.
Otherwise,
Um,
I'm a billionaire by now, but
yeah, yeah. We'll leave that for the next one. Okay. Thank you so much, and see you next week.